Hi, this is Tom from Fallen Oak Drums. Today I'll be setting up my inner drum milling jig for a 16 by 16 oak tom. In this video, I will cover the jig setup, and in a future video, I will show you the actual milling process. In this first sequence, I have the jig laid out on my router table, which I use because it has some T-tracks that hold down the jig to the work surface very nicely. I don't have everything I need to put this jig together for the 16 by 16 drum, but I want to get things sized up here. So that's what you see in this sequence. Just the parts laid out. You can see that I have a all-thread rod that has some bearings on it that was set up for my bass drum that was only 14 inches deep, but this tom is 16 inches deep, so I need bigger pieces of all thread to support the drum for the turning process. Just to summarize the design of my jig, there are T-bolts that hold the jig assembly to the router table. The assembly has 3/4 inch holes to support the 3/4 inch all thread rod, which has bearings to allow the drum to turn smoothly. There are also adjustable supports for the router sled height and guide blocks to keep the sled aligned. One other thing, in order to help the drum turn smoothly, I have the interfaces of the jig covered with some slick plastic that I cut from the lid of a storage container. The router sled is made from some pieces of steel bed rail and scrap wood. I mounted my extremely old Craftsman router to a piece of thin plywood, and then I hot glued that to the steel rails. I'm sure that this looks pretty lame to any experienced woodworkers who may be watching this, but my results are good. Hot glue is cheap, so I don't feel compelled to invest a lot of effort into making this prettier. So at this point I have to check if the router sled and the position of the router is going to give me enough travel through the drum to cover all 16 inches. And spoiler alert, it does not. Not the way it's set up right now anyway. So I'm going to be going through a lot of tweaks to my jig to get this thing to work. And another spoiler alert, I do get it to work. First thing I have to do is remove these spacer blocks from in between the two pieces of the jig. I put these in so that I could use longer pieces of all thread rod and have some variability of drum sizes that I could handle. But you know, that doesn't work so well when you're changing by a couple inches, and inevitably I usually end up cutting pieces of all thread to sort of match the drum depth that I'm working with. So I don't really need those spacer blocks there, and they will give me the additional travel that I need for the router through the drum to cover the whole depth. Now this next sequence is kind of fun. I measure up the all thread rod, and I believe it's 17 1/4 is what I came to conclusion would work best. And so I set it up in my vise and put some tape on there to make the mark, and pulled out my reciprocating saw and some 20-year-old metal cutting blades that I have. And it didn't go so well with this first cut. As you'll see, I ended up bringing in some WD-40 to try to lubricate the cut. That just produced some really cool smoke. I finally did get through it all, and but then on the next cut, I found a better blade. Look at that smoke pouring off of there. I sped this up just to get over the frustration of it while I was editing. And that blade I had on there, I mean, there were spots where the teeth were just completely gone. So I really should have looked a little harder before I even started this cut for a better blade. Right. The first cut was sped up a lot. The second cut is shown here in real time. It shows you the difference a good blade makes. Now that I have the all thread cut to the length I need, I'm ready to start setting up the jig. Table for reference. Next, these guys, the bearings on there. So the hardware that I'm working on here are two 17 and a quarter inch all thread rods, 8 3/4 inch nuts, 4 sealed bearings, and the bearings are from Dunpart R12-2RS model. They are 3/4 inch by 1 5/8 inch by 7/16 inch. And one other note here, I use this 3/4 inch 10 threads per inch all thread because it is super rigid. On various projects I've used smaller or narrower all thread rods, and you'd be surprised at the deflection you can get even with 1/2 inch, which seems like it's pretty sturdy stuff. So the 3/4 inches worked out real well for me, and those bearings that I mentioned, they fit almost perfectly. There's very little play. The old tape measure, going for about 16 and 1/8. To the 16th right now. I'll give that a try. Push this a little. Just let both sides measure the same. Now I own a wireless mic, but it doesn't work very well, so I don't use it. What I'm doing here, or what I just did, was measure the spacing between the two supports. For the 16-inch drum, which is almost exactly 16 inches, I want to have a little bit of room for it to turn, so I'm going for a distance of 16 and 1/8. When I'm done measuring the distance and I get the correct distance, I lock down the left side, and then what I should have done was adjusted the bearings out and tightened them up with the nuts so that they don't move on the rod. I forget to do it here, but I come back later and do it. Okay. Now, take our drum. Do this. Ooh. Pretty good. contact with all the bearings. Excellent. Around. So basically, got this thing set up, ratchet strap just there for a little tension so it doesn't move much when we're turning it. Yeah. So now we just have to get the sled ready with the router. The nuts on these bearings. So now I've realized that I did not tighten the bearings on, and I take the drum off, take the strap off, and I use kind of the jam nut concept to tighten the two nuts against the bearing, making sure that the nut, let's say on the left of the left bearing, is in contact with the left support. That's so the rod doesn't move around, bearing stays in one place, and the drum just tracks real nice if you do it that way. Router table inside milling, 722. Did a little switcheroo. I moved this back to the left side where it should be, and this to the right side so they don't stick out anymore. And it's because I needed to align with the assembly I have for the router sled. So router sled goes in there. Oops. It's kind of goofy, but it works. This goofy looking bracket that I'm installing here on the left side of the table is what's going to support yet another piece of 3/4 inch all thread that I use to allow me to turn a crank and move the router sled through the depth of the drum. This is something I didn't do originally, but after numerous drums made, I realized I wanted to sort of regulate the amount of cutting that I do with each turn of the drum, and I guess you'll see that if you watch the next video where I do the actual turning. Why this here? Oh, yeah, I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't know why I need that. Okay, again, use the jam nut concept. Alright. So not very good live audio again, but what I've discovered here is that with this all thread in place for the crank to pull the sled from one side to the other while the router's going and I'm turning the drum, I don't have enough clearance with the way that bracket is set up. So I spend about the next half hour of real time dinking around with changing that bracket around. It's just 2x4s, put together with all-purpose screws, so it's easy to change. And I even had to move a piece of wood, the sort of the pull piece on the sled, so that I could get the travel that I needed for the router from one side to the other to cover the whole 16-inch drum. Again, the first time I'm doing a 16-inch drum, and didn't really think through all the possibilities when I was designing the thing a couple of years ago. Next, I re-glue the router base to the sled using plain old hot glue here, and it holds just fine. remarkably solid. Following that, I start to gauge how close the router bit is going to come to the shell and how much adjustability I have in the depth of cut. And I find that I'm not even close, so I'm going to have to make some more adjustments to the jig. But fortunately, I can do that because of the way I built the support for the router sled. The router sled supports are made of a main block and then a couple of shims, one top, one bottom. And so by taking out the shims, I'm able to lower the height of the router. And I do that, and I'm able to make contact of the router bit to the drum shell and still have plenty of adjustability to get this drum down to the thickness that I want it to be. This old router of mine adjusts the depth by using this ring that's threaded around the body of the router, so I'm just demonstrating how that works here. And finally, a look at the shell itself, showing you the current thickness, which is a little over a ½ inch. It's not perfectly even because the outer rounding doesn't really leave it in that state, but it's okay. After we get through the inside milling, it'll be even all the way around. That about does it for this one. This was everything I do to set up inner milling for my drums. And in my next video, to be released very soon, I'll actually show you the milling of this drum. I captured, I think, enough footage to give you a good idea of what it takes to go from setup to being finished with the milling. Thanks for watching, and feel free to comment politely. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have, or take any suggestions you might have, or consider any suggestions you might have. I mean, come on.